So I think these are the three areas that we need to ensure, put in place, so that the halal food industry, especially the eateries F&B, can continue to grow.
Okay, Assalamualaikum, Mohamed Khair. Thanks for joining our interview today. It's a pleasure to have you on our show. Welcome to our show.
Thank you very much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Thank you, Brother Fazal, for having me on board, sharing whatever little that I know with the market, especially the halal market in Singapore, and probably even around the world, for those who are watching from other parts of the world, what we have here in Singapore, inshallah.
Yeah, so I think the main reason I wanted to talk to you today is your experience in watching the halal market for many years
Yes.
in Singapore.
Yeah.
And I wanted to discuss with you how we have seen evolve the market evolution of in Singapore, the halal market evolution.
Yeah.
And how do you see the future and all that. But before we do that, maybe briefly, Brother Khair, if you can explain a little bit your connection to the halal market in Singapore the last few years.
I've been involved with the halal market, in fact, since sometime mid-1990s, when I began my work, my consulting work especially, helping small and medium enterprises in Singapore in capacity building, capability building under the government scheme called Local Enterprise Technical Assistance Scheme, LITAS. Among my clients at that time, that was way back in 1994, 1995, we had several Muslim-owned restaurants, eateries. And at that time, this is very interesting. At that time, the focus was not so much on halal certification. In fact, there was not much demand, if I may say so, even though earlier there was one international brand that came into Singapore and went halal. But overall, the halal market at that time was pretty different from what we have today in Singapore. Those days when I run consulting services with my client, especially focusing on Muslim-owned restaurants. I call it Muslim-owned because really those restaurants are owned by Muslims. And there was not much demand for Muslim-owned restaurants then to really go halal. Today, almost every day we have inquiries on how to go halal, for example, by especially non-Muslim owned eateries.
So I mean, since you talked about how the halal assurance has evolved because the Muslims are getting to know more and more, some thoughts on how important is now, if you take the picture now, how important is halal assurance for the Muslim market, Muslim consumers?
It is indeed becoming more and more important, especially in light of what we have learned very recently of the meat scandal across the way. Then it becomes a lot more. And of course, there are other issues that I've come across, even way before the current scandal erupted in our neighboring country. So it becomes a lot more important to ensure that as far as halal assurance is concerned, it is properly put in place, not abused, not exposed to scandals. But these are evolving things. Halal assurance means, how do we really know that the food presented to us, available in the market, offered to us as alternatives, are really halal? So it is important to have a third party, independent party, to give assurance to the halal market. Yes, we have gone through all these things. We have put in place some kind of framework for compliance. And you can be rest assured that having gone through, we certify that the food presented by the eatery is halal. So I think halal assurance becomes very important to give that kind of confidence. In the context of Singapore, I think, which is very interesting, we have come to a point where non-Muslims begin to appreciate the importance of halal assurance. I think that's a very important milestone that probably the local market has actually achieved.
So I think coming back to halal assurance, I mean, it's we of course we do a lot of research, ongoing research all the time. Certification is probably the best form of assurance.
Yes.
Third-party certification. Of course, Muslims generally accept to a certain level a Muslim-owned restaurants. I think most Muslims, even there is no certificate. If you are, especially in the Singapore context, for probably 90+%, probably close to 100% would walk in still to Muslim-owned restaurants. I think the question is, what about the other the establishments who probably sincerely want to cater to the Muslim market? They probably, but however they are not Muslims. They don't have probably for whatever reason they're also not going for certification. They complicate the subject by saying no pork, no lard.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
What's your take on this type of restaurants who are, I believe, I think sincerely they want to sort of target the Muslims, probably sincerely believing that they do have their food is acceptable for Muslims. So how do they go about trying to tackle this issue?
I think the no pork, no lard issue has been going on for a long time. We believe the operators, the owners, they really want to reach out to the Muslim market. And even I've come across some of such operators, they say they want to reach out to even vegans. So not only Muslims, and also to other faiths that believe in certain on the issues of pork and lard. But focusing on just Muslims alone, the sincerity alone is not enough. I think it is important for Muslims, not just the halal authority, because in the first place in Singapore, halal is voluntary. No one can force anyone to go for halal certification. But for those companies, for those eateries that really want to reach out to the halal market. Now, in my conversation, as far as the term halal market is concerned, I include non-Muslims in the halal market. We are not targeting only just Muslims. Sure. So if really those companies, eateries, restaurants, whatsoever, they essentially want to reach out to consumers in the halal market, then they should really seriously consider doing it the way in which it becomes more credible. There's a lot of validity in the whole process. Because I come to understand in my conversation with some of these people that they thought halalness is only contingent upon having the food, with the food having no pork or lard, and there's nothing else. Okay? But of course, when you explain to them, then they begin to, there's more scope in halalness, not just not having pork or lard. They didn't know. Some even didn't know that actually alcohol is a major issue within the scope of halalness. So I think there's a lot more education that needs to be done.
But how do we, increase the trust with consumers when it comes to halal, and especially in halal food?
I think it is a very important issue. We have to look at it in a holistic manner. Trust is super important, very crucial. We know in the world today, not just Singapore. I mean, Singapore, we don't see that much probably. But all over the world, there are anti-halal movements.
True.
We know,
True.
we are not targeting this discussion on the anti-halal movement, but we need to recognize forces that work to undermine the halal integrity. So it is an important question, the trust that consumers must have on halal eateries and eventually halal certification, the assurance surrounding halal food. So when you talk about trust, I think it is an undertaking not to be shouldered by the halal authorities alone. It has to be undertaken by the community as a whole. That's one of the reasons why I actually created the Facebook group, Halal Cafe and Restaurants in Singapore. Now I think about 152,000 members. That's just one of the reasons. It is actually to form a community that can help build trust within at least the local context. We're not looking at the international context, but within the local context. How can we handle issues?
Right.
How can we talk about issues? okay, to be very frank, even halal certified eateries, there could be some lapses.
Sure.
Okay, those are lapses which should not be construed as purposeful in my mind, to the extent it undermines the whole integrity of the halal assurance system in Singapore that we have. Of course, there are opportunists. Okay, we have gotten cases in the past. We know where the owners or the operators of those halal certified eateries do not really comply. They try to make use of some so-called, I wouldn't say loopholes, but they simply did not comply with certain requirements. And it was actually found out by consumers, and it was reported, and eventually the local halal authority actually took a very quick action, which is, to me, that's very important. So the group actually helped to establish facts, and so the group has actually become a good platform for consumers to interact and see how certain key action have been taken or could have been taken by the local halal authority. So that will actually increase trust in our own halal logo certification system and whatnot. And also very important is this: we need the consumer, the community to work together to become, at the end of the day, should there be any party thinking of creating a scandal, misleading the public, we can't afford to have MUIS officers on the ground all the time. I think that shouldn't be the way it works. Because even police, we cannot find police everywhere 24 hours a day. So I think the best thing to do is for the community itself to be the eyes and ears on the ground, to look out for one another, to strengthen the integrity of the halal market, and to work together with the local halal authority, so that the chances of scandals, the chances of purposeful non-compliance could be lessened. The chances of whoever whatsoever trying to play pang, so to speak, would be actually lessened, because they know in Singapore, for example, the community is highly informed, pretty enlightened, and they are sensitive about such things. So I think that could be one way in which we can build trust. And I think what is also important is, we know when you talk about trust, if you can establish trust within the community itself, within the halal market itself, that would contribute to actually to build trust internationally. So when Muslim travelers come to Singapore, they know Singapore's halal system is not standing on its own, only enforced by the local halal authority, but supported by the community. I think this is an important ingredient, important formula that we need to establish in the longer term, so that Singapore overall will be seen as not just a hub for halalness, or not just a hub for halal products whatsoever, but I think very important, if you can showcase to the world that we are a halal community working together hand in hand with the authorities, I think this is similar to the tripartite arrangement in NTUT, the workers work together with the government and the union, that kind of stuff. So if you can have such an arrangement, it may not be formalized, but I think if the community can own this halalness matter and take it wholeheartedly, this is important for us. It is commandment from Allah Subhanahu Wa Taala. We want to make sure that, yes, the whole ecosystem actually is upheld not only by the local halal authority, but strongly supported by the consumers and the community. And of course, the restaurants, the eateries, the business establishments. I think if these three parties can work together, I think the trust that we are talking about today can be well protected, and even be used as an example of how the halal community at any locale in the world could actually be developed. Allah.
On another question, slightly moving to a couple of other questions that I have. What do you, if you, of course, some restaurants, I mean, no pork, no lard type of restaurants, if they really want to become halal certified, what are their biggest challenges? Is it an easier process? Is it so complicated, too complicated? Why some of these restaurants are sometimes reluctant? I don't know whether they are reluctant or they're not aware that it is possible. Or what are the key challenges that they are facing, and how can they sort of overcome them?
I think number one, the most important challenge is the worldview of the owners themselves. They must believe, they must overcome this idea that going halal will make them go through a very difficult process. I think that one they have to debunk, so to speak. In fact, I've come across quite a fair bit of non-Muslims who have actually debunked this myth, so to speak, long time ago. They look at our halal certification overall as, okay, we must understand where they're coming from. As far as running a business is concerned, they firmly believe that having halal certified restaurants, hawker stalls, whatever, you name it, is the way to go in the local context. Even I've spoken to owners of big companies, even public listed. They're saying that the way to go in F&B in Singapore is to go halal. And these are all non-Muslims. So if for those out there who are thinking, not sure whatsoever, I think this is the first hurdle they must overcome. So as far as the non-Muslims are concerned, I think one major hurdle is actually to firmly believe that going halal would actually help them in their business itself. And it's proven by so many actually. A lot of international brands come to Singapore. Give one example, one popular burger brand. In the early days, they spent quite a long time to go for halal certification because at that time, the market wasn't mature enough. At that time, it was not so easy to find halal certified ingredients all over the world. But the situation now is so different.
Right.
We have a lot of ingredients with halal certification from all over the world. So the situation has changed dramatically. For any non-Muslims wishing to go into the halal market, do be rest assured as far as ingredients are concerned. Of course, there are some unique ingredients, you have to do a bit more work, but generally there are a lot more alternatives today as compared to about 30 years ago. So that's the first hurdle. They have to overcome that mindset, so to speak, that it is difficult. It is not difficult actually. Of course, the next challenge is to comply with halal requirements locally. Okay, and as I alluded earlier, even mentioned earlier directly that in Singapore today, Muiz, the scrutiny on requirements have become greater, but I think it is good. Given the kind of scandals we have around the world, so traceability is an important issue. We cannot take it for granted. Okay, so that's the second. But even that, as I mentioned earlier, given the wide range of options and alternatives and the kind of systems that we have in place, that can easily be overcome. As long as the owners of those eateries wishing to go halal work together hand in hand with whosoever consultant or even Muiz for that matter to ensure compliance to the halal requirements, I think that should not be much of a problem. But they must be open to options, to alternative suppliers. I think that's important. Cannot be stuck to only just one supplier because not every supplier has everything. There are options there. The third thing is this. The third challenge is basically once you go halal, I think it is also important to position yourself in the halal market in such a way that people actually know who you are, and what you sell. This is where, of course, you'll find bloggers whatsoever promoting. They have to be open to such reviews. I think very important is things do not come automatically. Once you go halal, the crowd will come. It is very important to also understand that halalness, the halal certificate, is not a magic potion.
Yes,
You go halal, certainly the crowd will come. I think that's very important. They have to be open to reviews. They have to be open to feedback. This is where I learned also from the group that we have run for the past 5 years plus 6. This year coming to its 6th year, that reviews are very important.
Thanks for your time, Brother Khair. Just one last question. In your opinion, how can the halal food industry, continue to grow in Singapore? What are your thoughts? And of course we are going to tackle that in our report as well. But personally, what are your thoughts? How do you see this market grow in the next few years in Singapore?
I think very key is what we have discussed earlier, the trust that consumers have. I think, but that trust then depend on number 2, the integrity. super important, integrity of the overall halal ecosystem. Number one integrity would be the halal assurance system that we have here in Singapore. I think that's very important. I know there are some issues raised overseas, but I think locally, in my opinion, we have a pretty good running halal assurance system, and is being improved as we move along. We learn along the way. The other integrity is usually on the part of business operators. I think we have to be sincere, not to try to do hanky-panky stuff in the way they run their business. The third integrity would be among the consumers. I think we have to work hand in hand, as we mentioned earlier, with the halal authority, with the businesses, to give, in fact, in my opinion, it is important for consumers to actually speak up. Speak up first. I think should they find any non-compliance on the spot, they should actually point it out to the operators, because people do make mistakes, and sometimes lapses are unintentional. Yeah, so just help lah. No need to blast out on social media without even clarifying with the operators of those eateries. I think that's important. So the intention is to help strengthen the integrity, not so much to
bring people
blame, claim, or shame whatsoever. I think that's very important. The next thing is actually to help the industry grow. I think pretty important is the continuous education, awareness. Things evolve, things change. One example is this. Just last year and 2019, 2020, we have things like mock pork, mock meat. And then now we have meat grown in the labs, for example, from stem cells and like that. So I think, and I think these things are going to stay. Partly part of the global effort to ensure sustainability of food supply. And this is where continuous education among consumers, players in halal market, is very important. So I think these are the three areas that we need to ensure, put in place, so that the halal food industry, especially the eateries, F&B, can continue to grow. Well, of course, along the way, we know there's no such thing as growth without any challenges. There'll be challenges along the way, confirmed. There, no pain, no gain, so to speak. So, but I think what is, if we have the tripartite relationship among consumers, the regulatory body, and also the businesses, I think those challenges can be overcome, and it would actually help to strengthen. It's almost like, you go to the gym and do pumping iron. That's something that we have to bear in mind. There'll be issues along the way, but I think if together these three parties can work hand in hand, I think it would contribute a lot towards the growth of the food industry, halal food industry especially. Allahu Alam.
Thank you very much. I think it was excellent insights that you shared, I mean, Singapore, especially in terms of halal integrity, Singapore has a reputation around the world, of how good they are, especially when it comes to the local context.
Yes.
So I think that's something that can be further strengthened and built.
Inshallah.
Thanks, Brother Khair, for your time, and we'll keep the discussion going at some other time.
Inshallah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh.